Now that the students have an investigatable question, they are ready to start designing and conducting their investigation. This video will cover these parts of the scientific inquiry rubric. The first thing the students must decide is how they are actually going to measure the effectiveness of hand washing in getting rid of germs. We're going to use a product called Glitterbug, which contains a hand washing gel that simulates germs and a black light that shows up these germs under a UV light. If you have the students put a small amount of the lotion on their hands and rub it all over, making sure that they do the backs of their hands as well, in between their fingers and around their nails, so that it's really spread out. Then they need to let the lotion dry. Using the UV light, the students can now see where the glow is shining on their hands. That simulates where their hands are covered in germs. Now, if you wash your hands for a set amount of time and then go back and have a look under the UV light to see what percentage of germs you were able to get rid of from your hand washing. So now back under the UV light, we can see what percentage of our hands have been cleaned of the germs. One way students can quantify this percentage is by using a scale. One idea for developing a scale is that students could draw around their hand and then colour in the proportion of their hand that is covered in germs. If they colour in all of their hand, then their hand is completely covered in germs. Parts of their hand, a different percentage covered in germs. And that way they can develop a scale that they can use to measure the effectiveness of their hand washing. The scale might end up looking something like this, where the students have got a hand that's completely covered in, and they call that completely germy. Partially coloured in, very germy. Then we've got germy, slightly germy, and completely clean. Now they could also quantify this by adding a number to their descriptions. So completely germy could take on the number 4 or 4 pluses. Very germy, 3 pluses. Germy, 2 pluses. Slightly germy, 1 plus, and completely clean, a minus. This gives them a way of recording how effective their hand washing is in getting rid of the germs. Once the students have worked out how they're going to measure their dependent variable, they need to start thinking about their independent variable. There are quite a few things they need to decide. They need to decide what time intervals they're going to use, how many times they're going to measure at that particular time interval, what equipment they're going to need, and how they're going to set up their record of results. So before moving on, they really need to have a table of results set up or some other method of recording their data. An example of a results table that we're going to use shows that we're going to do 4 different measurements at each time interval, and then we're going to average the results. Each time interval increases by 5 seconds each time, and we're going to use 5 different time intervals. Now it's time for the students to think about fair testing and to consider how they're going to control all the other variables. The best thing for them to do is to go back to their variables grid, like the one we developed in video 1, and look at each of the other things that they thought would affect the effectiveness of hand washing, and figure out how they're going to control each of these. So for example, they could go through and decide that they're going to use cold water, that it's going to be running from a tap, that they're going to measure out 20 mils of liquid soap for each hand wash, that they're only going to rub the soap all over once, they're going to rinse the hands after rubbing 3 times, that the same person will be using the soap and rubbing their hands, and that the same person will be judging and applying the scale to record the results. This way, they're controlling all of those other things on the variables grid, and they can move forward knowing that it's a fair test. Students should now make a list of all the equipment that they think they'll need to complete their procedure. Next, before proceeding with their investigation, the students should make a prediction. Based on what they've already experienced and what they know, they should try to answer the question that they posed at the beginning of this investigation. For example, the students might predict that as the time for hand washing increases, the percentage of germs removed increases at the same rate. Notice that the prediction mentions both the dependent and independent variable. Before starting to conduct their investigation, students should now complete a risk assessment that includes all of the information on this form. This form can be downloaded from the OSA website. The best way for students to now develop a clear procedure is to actually have a go. Trial and error will help the students settle on a method that generates enough data and suitable data to help them answer their investigatable question. Once students are happy with their method, they should write out clear steps that can be followed by anybody else and can easily be repeated. Students should also keep a record of the choices that they made with their procedure along the way, because it will help them evaluate their procedure later on. The next video will look at how the students analyse and evaluate their results after they've completed their investigation.